So I recently watched a video by a guy called the Cherno on YouTube who does he does C++ tutorials, game development tutorials, stuff like that. And he did a video. It was a while ago now, but he's talking about the his thoughts on the AAA games industry. And it was a reasonable video, but I just felt that he didn't seem like he'd ever worked in the AAA games industry. So I thought I'd do a video telling you all about the kind of differences between the indie and AAA games industry from a software development point of view, and like how is it different working in the AAA games industry? Because there's a lot of people online talking about it, but not anyone who's actually like doing it and actually saying, hey, this is how it's actually different. When you're actually there, this is how it's different. So this isn't a view on the industry as such. This is just a view on like, if you are a software developer on an indie game or a AAA game, how does a AAA game differ from working on a game just on your own? So what skills are you going to have to learn that you didn't think you were going to have to learn, if you know what I mean? And it won't necessarily be like development skills. It might be something else. So that might be one of the things that surprises you, is that you probably have, if you worked on indie games, you probably have all the knowledge you need to work on a AAA game. There just may be other skills that you can kind of only learn in that industry. How is the code that you work on any different, if it's different at all? So this is from my point of view as a software developer. And this first part is probably applicable to other people in the industry, like animators or whatever, because there's not really very much to do with code in this first part. The second part will be more about how the code's different. So why should you listen to me? Well, I've worked on my own personal projects, which everyone should do. I've worked on a small game that I've published myself. I've worked on commercial games that had a very small number of people, where I was the only programmer, for instance, but there were a few other people on the team. And I've worked on commercial games that had so many people I can't count working on them. And this is my personal experience of like, how is that different? So you can see I've been through all the phases of working on something on my own, working on something with a small team, and working on something with an incredibly large team. So your mileage may vary. If you already work in the AAA games industry or whatever, you may say, oh, this isn't anything like what I do. So it could be different for you. Who knows? But what I'll do is I'll categorize the things I mentioned as like these kind of like these different projects that you can work on, going from like personal projects, which is like because like there's no real way of like so people say AAA and indie, but there's kind of like in betweens, if you know what I mean. It's like people who work on large commercial games have done things on their own. They've written code on their own, and they've written small games, and they've written games in small teams. They usually have like, so there's like a shade of grey of going from like where in this like scale of between going from personal projects, small games, and small commercial games and large commercial games. Where does indie fit into that, and where is AAA in that? But you'll probably find that everyone in the AAA games industry, this large commercial games that I'm talking about, has done these other things as well, because that's how they cut their teeth. Some people go straight into AAA games, straight out of college, straight into AAA games. And that's not totally uncommon, but most people have done at least some of these other things as well. So if you're thinking about getting into AAA and you're already an indie developer, or you develop on your own, then these might be some things you have to learn, or you will just learn on the job. But let's just try and classify what these things I'm saying actually are. So what is a personal project? It's just it's a small test. You write a piece of code. You might write tic-tac-toe or something like that. You might do something just to find out if it works. So you might get Unity out and make this thing on the left, which I think is part of Unity's demo or something. Sometimes you don't even save it, because you're just trying to find something out, and it's just turns out to be rubbish and it's a bad idea. So you don't even save it. Sometimes you do. Usually you never finish it because there's no point, because you found out everything you need to know. You definitely never publish it. You might publish something like this on GitHub maybe, but probably not, because it's usually not useful to anyone but you. I would say most software developers or developers do this, and if they don't, they should, because you should always be like, just going, I wonder if this would work, and getting out a test project or writing a bit of code and finding that out before you try and put it into practice. So it's basically a learning experience. So this at the bottom end of the scale, this is not indie games. This is what everybody does. Like everybody does this, or they should. And if you're not doing this, then you're not probably going to be a game developer. You're just not going to do anything. If you're just watching tutorials and you're not writing any code, you're wasting your time totally. So next step up from that is kind of the same thing, except you're actually going to make a little game. So you can see here on the left, I don't know where this picture from, but someone's clearly made a little test game in Unreal. And it's rough, but it is a game. It's got characters, they're holding guns, it's got UI, it's got score, it looks like it's got an objective. It's probably a network game as well by the looks of it. So somebody has sat down and created a really quick, probably prototype or a small game, just for their own personal benefit probably. They're not going to publish this because it's probably unplayable for... you have to read a bunch of instructions on how to start the game or something. Who knows? I'd say most developers haven't done this and got to the point where they actually finished the game, and they definitely haven't published it like on their own. Like you could call, if you actually publish this, you could call yourself an indie developer. But a lot of people probably don't do this. They probably do the personal testing and they don't actually sit down and write a full game themselves. So this can be a learning experience again. Like sometimes you wouldn't finish the game, sometimes you would. Even if you did, you wouldn't support this game after you've launched it. This is almost really a throwaway thing. So this could be like indie possibly, but probably not. So if you sat down and you were independently wealthy and wrote your own little game, are you an indie developer? I don't know, maybe. It's possible. But one step up from this is a small commercial game. Now, this is probably where indie starts to kick in. Now, this is like a really small game. It's not necessarily... It doesn't have a lot of features probably because if you're making this on your own or in a small team, you just can't put all these features in because it takes too long. So it's small, but it's polished and it's good. And it's a finished game. So, and the thing is that because it's commercial, you're going to publish this. The idea is that I at least want to try and make some money back on this. I want to try and, or at least I want to try and get players to play my game because I'm excited about it. But it usually won't be played by many players. Now, that's not always true because a lot of the time these games get published and, 1,000 people might play your game or something like that. That certainly happened to me. You publish a game, a couple of thousand people play it, and you might call that a success. Sometimes these kind of games go out there and millions of people play them. Who knows what happens? But usually, I'd say the usual case is not many people will play this game. Even though it's polished, even though it's finished and it's been, it's working correctly, not many people are going to play it. And they probably, you probably won't support this after launch. You might do, but probably, after you find out that only 2,000 people play this game a year, it's probably not going to get much support. And also, one of the reasons for this is you probably don't have a marketing budget for this game. It's probably, it's because it's been self-published and it's small, or it's been published by a small company who doesn't have the money for it. So chances are that that's the reason why not many people are going to play it, even if it's an amazing game. So after that, I would say if this is indie here, I mean, indie can be so many things. It can be slightly more than this, but up from there, you go to the large commercial game, which is probably where you're thinking about, which is where AAA comes in, which is you're going to have a fully featured large game with lots of features. It's probably got it might be like the same thing you did in the small commercial game, but that's just one part of this game possibly. It's just a bigger version of the other thing, and it's probably, it could be even just as polished, but at the end of the day, the point of this game is it costs a lot of money to make, so it has to make a lot of money back. And because to get all these features in, you're going to have a large team working on it. So this game's always going to be published because to get this number of people working on this game, it's going to cost a lot of money. And if it's going to cost a lot of money, somebody wants that money back because somebody put that money in. So if this game costs 20 million to produce, then someone's going to want that 20 million back plus their interest, plus a bit of profit as well. So usually this game will be played by millions of players, and there's probably a few reasons for that. One of them is probably the game's probably very good. I mean, there are some AAA games out there that are god-awful, but your game, or this game, that's had a lot of effort, a lot of time is built into it, is a kind of like a special thing. Like, you've got to realize that a AAA game is a very, very special thing. You can't make lots of games of that magnitude. There's just not enough people in the world with the skills to do it. So this game will be played probably by millions of players because it's just so good usually. And also because it's got a 20 million budget, say, it's got, a few million invested in marketing. So a lot of people are going to know about it. And also the team's big enough to support this game after launch. So even though the team may mostly go on to work on the next game, some of the people will probably stay on the game to support it when it's live, to fix bugs and to add new features and so on and so forth. And that could happen in the indie one. In fact, the indie one probably does that a lot as well now. But this one will probably definitely have it, almost definitely have it, I should say. And yeah, it commonly has a marketing budget. I think it would be quite rare to have a really large AAA game that didn't have some kind of marketing budget or some kind of like publisher who was, getting behind it or getting some kind of marketing into it. So they're like my shades of grey of what development is. Where you fit into that, I don't know, but the large commercial game is probably the AAA, and somewhere underneath, probably in between some of those things as well, is all these different indie games. So there's definitely a lot of stuff there. So how does that really, compare to you, if you're working in AAA as a software developer? Well, there's this really good saying, which I don't know where this comes from, but if you want to go quickly, you go alone, and if you want to go far, you go together. And that just totally sums up like the difference between these small games and these large games with lots of people on, is that not the one isn't better than the other. Indie's not better than AAA, and AAA isn't better than indie. They're different things. And the example here I've got is it's really the difference between this X-Wing and the Starship Enterprise, because they're both really cool spaceships in their own way. One isn't better than the other. They do different things. The X-Wing is like really fast and nimble, but it's not made for going like very long distances. It's not even got anywhere. It's only got space for one person in there. There's very little luggage. There's space for one robot. Where did Luke Skywalker go to the toilet in this thing? He couldn't. He had to pull over at a planet and stop and stuff like that. But it's incredibly nimble. It can change direction very quickly, and it's very good at what it does. But you're not gonna go on an all-out space trip to the edge of the universe in an X-Wing. You're going to want to take the Starship Enterprise. It can carry 1,000 people. It's probably got a gymnasium inside and stuff like that. And it's nowhere near as nimble. It can't just like change direction, on a dime. It's not just going to do that, but it can go. It's made for exploration and going far, and it's going to do it really well, and it's going to be comfortable in there because you're going to have your sick bay and your gymnasium and a holodeck and whatever. So that's really the difference. It's like not one isn't better than the other. They both do their separate things, and there's room in the games industry for both of these things, which is totally great nowadays. So it used to be that just every game was kind of an indie game, at the start, and now we've got these games that have got millions put into them and just are miracles of modern computing technology. So what's the pros and cons of all these, like working in these teams when you're working as a AAA developer? Well, if you're working on a large team, 100 plus people, whatever, one of the advantages is that you can build a game that's got so many features in it because you've got so many people working on it that you can like divide all that labor up into different parts of the game and get different people working on it, and you can make a game that's got loads of things in it. Like you take GTA, it's got like shooting and it's got driving and it's got planes and it's got heists and stuff like that, and it's like each one of those things requires somebody to do some work in there. So you can get a game that's got more features probably when you're working in a larger team. You can do that in indie as well if you want to, but it's probably just going to take you longer. And if it takes too long, your game probably won't come out and no one will play it. And a game that nobody plays isn't really a game, is it? The other advantage you've got is that because you've got more people on the project, the people who are on it can specialize in a smaller area of the project, and they can get really good at that. So if you're a software developer, you could specialize just in doing the AI and know nothing about graphics, or you could specialize in the graphics and know nothing about AI. So by getting more people onto the team, you can get people who can get better at individual parts of it. You still probably need people who understand the whole thing, but as an indie developer or a developer, like maybe you're the only software developer on a game, you're going to have to get good at everything, which is no bad thing, really, because really, a little knowledge in all these areas is very good. But eventually, if you do want to specialize in a certain thing, then you probably want to go into AAA games, because if you want to say, I only want to write AI, it's no good being an indie developer where you're the only developer, because you're going to have to write the graphics, and you're going to have to do all the sound, and you're going to have to do everything else that's in the game. So working in this large team is good if you want to specialize, and that's one thing. And also, one of the pros here is because the development's usually funded from, company X, then it means that you don't have to find the money or, while you're developing this thing. Because, developing a game takes time. And if you're doing it yourself, you're going to have to fund yourself while you're doing it. So having an external company or some other external source to fund this is really good. And you're going to get that with a large company who's dumping millions into the game. They're going to pay your bills, and they're going to, you're going to be able to eat while you're developing it. So that's going to be the good thing about it. So there are some downsides, I suppose. And the thing about having the larger team is, this is kind of going back to the X-Wing and the Starship Enterprise, is it's much harder to turn the Starship Enterprise than it is the X-Wing. You can't be as agile on a project with lots of people, because there's lots of people who are already steering in a certain direction. And if you want to steer in another direction, you've got to communicate to them and convince all those other people that, hey, I think we should do this. And they've got to buy into it as well. So you might have to be very good at convincing people, for instance. That might be one of the skills that you might need in the AAA games industry, is you need to be able to not just have an idea, but convince other people that it's a good idea. And that can be just as important as having the idea in the first place. It's no point having good ideas if you can't communicate to other people why it's good. If you just say, I think we should do this because I like it, no one's going to do it. You've got to buy into why the way you're steering the enterprise is the right way before they help you in changing that direction. And there will be more stakeholders invested in the direction of the title. There'll be people like who your close co-workers, right up to the people who are funding the title, and they are all invested in the direction of the title for one reason or another. So there will be directions that you can't even go. You won't be able to just say, turn it on its head and go, I don't want to make a third-person shooter anymore. I want it to be a driving game. You won't just be able to do that, because people will turn around and go, but we've already invested $1 million in marketing and we've done trailers and there's no cars in this, and you want to put a car in it. So it can happen, but usually it doesn't. So very early on in the project, it quite often can change direction. But as you get further and further on in the project, the direction gets set. And you can't be as agile as you'd like. And also, this is probably the one that people would say that they would hate the most about the AAA games industry, is that if they're working in it, they don't get to choose that direction. It's already been chosen for them, in that, the company comes and says, we're making a driving game, and now you've got to make a driving game, and you don't really have any choice on it. So if you're really picky about the kind of game you want to make, and then don't work in the AAA games industry, because you're not going to there won't be many games made each year that are AAA games, and you won't get to choose that project usually. You might get to choose, you can choose the project in terms of, like, you can go and pick the company you work for. So if you like making driving games, you could pick a company that's making a driving game, but there's no saying that they will, next title would be a driving game. Who knows? So there's definite advantages and disadvantages to that. And I wouldn't say, it's just like, don't work in AAA because of this, but it's the way it is. So what about if you're doing it small teams? Well, it's kind of going to be the reverse in some cases, because in a small team, you can change direction way quicker. If you've got a new idea, the chances are there's only a couple of people working on the project. So all you got to do is stand up at your desk and go, hey guys, do you think we should do red instead of blue? And everybody turns around and goes, sure, that sounds like a good idea, let's do it. And there's not as many people to convince on this thing, usually. Like, a smaller team is much easier to steer around. And it is worth noting that even in AAA, you still kind of work in small teams, because large teams become unmanageable. So you still end up with smaller teams that you work together with, but they're all steering in the direction that someone else has decided. But when the entire team is, like, sitting right next to you, it's really easy to just say, let's just try this. And everybody goes, cool, let's try it. You have more creative control over the title, again, because less stakeholders in the title means that there are less people who care about you steering it in a certain direction. Like, you may have total control in which direction the title goes. Who knows? You might be just like, everything I say goes on this project, and and you just say to your artist or whatever, draw me this thing, and they'll do it for you. That's usually not the way to go, but you've definitely got more creative control. And again, it's not to say in AAA you don't have creative control, because when you're making that driving game, even though you didn't choose to make the driving game, so for instance, you do get creative control over the things that you do, because that's what they need you to do. That's what you're there for. So it's not all bad on both sides, but I think you definitely get more creative control when you're doing a project for yourself. You can just change it to do whatever you want, and that can be good and bad. And that's basically the next point, is that you can be totally experimental with your game design. When you're working in a large game, because a lot of money's invested in it, they may not want to go down very experimental routes, because there's no proof. Like, they can't prove to their stakeholders, even the people who are spending the money have to prove to the people who have the money that, can we get this money back? And if they can't find reasonable proof, nobody wants to put their head on the chopping block and say, oh yeah, I think we should do this. And that can be good and bad, because yeah, it can stop you from going down a route where there's no money in that project, because the company would go bust. But on the other hand, there may be totally missed opportunities, and it's those missed opportunities that small teams can pick up on. So games like Minecraft just pick up on the opportunity of, like, well, people really like playing this little block game. Why don't we just make that? And there's no way a large company at the point when Minecraft was being made for the first time would have ever done that, because they would have just said, what, you want to make a game with people sticking blocks down that looks like crud? Who would do that? Well, turns out 40 million people love playing it, or whatever, or more than that probably now. So you can definitely be more experimental, and you probably should, because the AAA games industry isn't going to be as experimental as you can be. So that's your advantage in this case, that if you want to work on a small team and you want to, a small project, being experimental and having more creative control is definitely the thing that you want to be doing. So the cons are, again, the reverse of the AAA thing, is that you won't be able to put large amounts of features in the game, because the more features you want to put in, the more time's going to get put into it. And the problem you've got is that you haven't got many people to work on this. So if you want more features, it takes more time. If it takes too long, the game will probably never come out. So everyone will get, the funding will run out or whatever. So you do have to be careful that you probably have to stick to a smaller set of features, but you can be more experimental with those features. So again, it's just the reverse of the AAA thing. The other thing is the funding. Well, where are you going to get the funding from? Like, if this is a small company who's funding it, a company that's only got a few people funding you, but have only got a few people working on it, then they may be paying your wages, but they're not going to pay them forever. And if you're funding it yourself, well, it's up to you on, if you're independently wealthy and, you've made your millions, that's fine. You can work on this for the rest of your life if you want to. But otherwise, you're probably going to have to eat while you're developing. And if you're going to have to eat, you're going to need that money from somewhere, and you're going to need that money back at the end. So people who say game development is all about money in the AAA games industry, and it's not in indie, and they're all about creative, it's bullshit. Everyone has to make money out of this, because if they don't, well, they're not going to eat. So the only people who that can really work for is independently wealthy people who just don't need the money, have made their money somewhere else, and they can do whatever the hell they want. And those people quite often end up successful anyway. Like Gabe Newell, I suppose. He's a Microsoft billionaire or whatever, and now he runs Steam, and he just did what he wanted to do. It turns out the thing he wanted to do made loads of money as well. Who knew? So and the other problem then is that the funding can be a problem when it comes to the marketing budget, because your game can be amazing, but without some kind of marketing for it, how are you going to get that game into players' hands at all? And that will be a real problem. This game's released every second on iPhone and Android. So how are you going to get through the noise floor of all this stuff that's going on there all the time? So even if you make the most amazing game, if you run out of money for the marketing, or you don't have a way of marketing the game, chances are your game is going to be a failure. And that's really unfortunate. And a lot of people don't either think about that or don't want to think about that. But, because you're a game developer, you just want to sit down and make the game because that's what you love doing. No, game developers don't like marketing. So, you do need to be aware that your game needs marketing, and it's just an unfortunate consequence of game development. So that brings us to the next section of what kind of skills are you going to need, and how are you going to have to communicate when you're working in AAA that you didn't have to do in indie. So this really comes down to the team skills, because in effect you're going to have a larger team that you're working with. So the people you're going to be working with is going to be a total mix of skills and styles with the people working on the code. I mean, you might get this in indie as well if you've got a couple of developers, but you're going to get it more in AAA because there's going to be more developers. And the weird thing is that the skills is just going to be so diverse. It's going to be weird. You're going to get people, who've been working on games for 20 years, and you're going to get people who've just come out of college and have no clue what they're doing. And they're all going to be there, sitting there with you, working on stuff. And the weird thing is that I've found is that, and that comes down to this next section, is that the amount of experience that developers have and how good they are quite often not actually related. They usually are. Usually the seasoned developers are the better ones because they've got experience of doing things wrong, so they know when not to do things wrong. And you would expect the junior developers to be absolutely terrible because they don't know what they're doing and they're just really eager to just write any old code they can or whatever. But you quite often find that's not true. You quite often find that you'll get some junior developers who straight away you can tell that they're really good. Oh, this guy's actually coming up with some really good ideas and he's doing this stuff better than I am and stuff like that. And then you'll find that there's seasoned developers of 20 years who've just been doing it wrong for 20 years and just haven't got better at what they've done. So you have to be really careful about that, but you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. In that when you trying to work with other people and you're talking to them about whatever, give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't treat all like junior developers as idiots, and don't treat all senior developers as they're some kind of genius, because just treat them for what the skills you see that they have, and try and encourage the junior developers probably do need some encouragement if you're the one who's the seasoned developer. But chances are they might not be. You might be learning something from them. You never know. So expect the unexpected when it comes to your team's skills. So that can be a real eye opener that when you get with all these other developers, that it's just such a mix of people that you weren't expecting. So be careful of that one. And I suppose this also extends to the non-programmers or non-software developers and tech artists. That they also may have to work with coders or whatever and other people. And they'll also have other people in their industry who've been doing it for a long time and juniors and so on and so forth. So yeah, don't be afraid to talk with people. If you don't agree with the way someone's done something, it may be that you're the junior developer and there may be a seasoned developer and you won't agree with the thing that they've done. So don't be afraid to talk to people about that, but don't be aggressive about it because that's just dumb. But treat people with the respect that they deserve, but treat everyone with respect, basically. That's what I'm kind of saying. But don't be afraid to call people out on stuff, because certainly if you're a new junior developer, you're probably not going to want to be calling people out on I don't think this is a good idea. But you can, but be aware that if you're just doing that all the time because you want to be, boisterous, then you're going to make an idiot of yourself. So call things as they are, call things out as they are. If you see people doing good things, tell them they're doing good things. And if you see bad things, tell people they're doing bad things. And don't be afraid to call people out on it, and try and learn from all the good stuff and try and throw away all the bad stuff. And that's how you get better at doing this kind of other thing. So really that comes down to the one of the differences with, I think, one of the differences I would say with AAA and working on smaller teams in India or whatever, is that the communication with others it's important in India. Don't get me wrong. If you're a couple of developers, it's important you can communicate with each other. But once you get to AAA, the communication becomes extremely important, because you're going to spend way more of your time than you thought actually just talking to other people. If you're not good at communicating and talking to other coders or about code to other coders, you're going to be terrible at this, because you've got to be able to communicate what you're doing, and you've got to be able to ask people what are they doing, because there's so much going on that you're just gonna get lost if you don't communicate with each other what you're doing. If you just work in your own little bubble, you're just gonna get lost. So because there's going to be a lot of code basically, and there's going to be a lot of legacy code. So that's going to be the big problem. Is a lot of the time in AAA, I would say you'd never get to a project with a blank screen and say, hey, let's start the game. You'll almost never see that. Almost never. So every time you get on a project, there's going to be an absolute ton of legacy code, and some of it's going to have been there for a long, long time. Probably, sometimes around 20 years it could have been there, and the people who wrote it have gone. The documentation doesn't exist, and you're going to have to talk you're going to have to like find some other program and say, hey, can you tell me about what all this stuff does? And chances are, in the end, you might become the expert on that particular thing because no one knows anything about it. Everyone's disowned it, and you're the one who has to learn how it works just to fix it. So you may end up becoming the expert in this other piece of code that somebody wrote, and then you have to start modifying it and making it your own, basically. So again, you need to discuss your ideas with other people. Because when you're writing new code, you're not, if you say you do need to add something to the project, it's not a legacy code that you're working on it, even though it will probably be part of some legacy code you'll probably be adding it to. You need to be able to talk to others about when you say, even if it's just a sounding board, to say, hey, I was thinking of trying this. Is this a terrible idea? And quite often people will come to you and say, I don't know, so I think you should try it. Or they might say, I tried that last year and it didn't work. Or I've seen a GDC talk that says don't do this. But anything that you can convey about some crazy idea you've got, it's just worth sounding it off with some other people, and they'll probably do the same to you. So yeah, other people will definitely come to you with their ideas. If you're not good at talking to people, well, you're not going to be a good programmer in this industry. You may not be a good programmer at all if you're not good at talking to people. I know programming is about sitting down and tapping on keys and punching numbers, but that's not true. You've got to be able to talk to other people about what it is you're doing, and then not just talking to people. This is the other thing. You're going to have a lot of people who aren't actually local to you. There's going to be people who work remotely, people who work from home, people who work in other offices, people who work in different time zones, and there's going to be there'll be a lot of other teams that work kind of on, maybe not directly on the project, but on code that's used in the project, like on game services or something like that. You're going to have to be able to talk to them as well. And you're going to have to be able to communicate well via basically text message or some kind of other means, even on a conference call or whatever. So you're going to have to be able to good at, being concise, getting together your stuff, telling people about what you're doing and asking them what to do. So you're going to be asking tons of questions, especially when you get on a new project, even if you're a seasoned developer, because there's going to be like, what the hell is all this stuff? What is it all? This, you get there, there's 20 million lines of code. Where do you start? Who knows? You're going to have to talk to somebody and say, look, what should I do? And eventually, once you've learned more and more of the code, you'll find that people start coming over to your desk and asking you questions, because suddenly you realize, oh, now I'm the expert, and I didn't realize when that had happened, but you realize that everyone else had left and you were the only person who knew anything about that thing that you've been has been dumped on you probably. But who knows? But that's the whole part one section. That's just mainly about the communication and what the difference between kind of like working in AAA and what the kind of different projects are. So next part, when this is continued, is to talk about how all the code works. I kind of touched on that before, but the code ownership, the lifetime, the quality, and what you should do with the code when you're working on it, how it's going to morph over time. So I will catch you for that one.